Welcome to OsherWise. I am Dr. Natalie Marshall, and I am the chair of this public education series, Lifestyle Strategies to Support Health and Well-Being. Tonight's class is titled Brain Health, Neuroplasticity, and Aging, Supporting Cognition at Every Age. And it is my great pleasure to introduce your instructor, Dr. Nancy Isenberg. Dr. Isenberg is the medical director of the Center for Healthy Aging and Women's Brain Health Program at the Swedish Neuroscience Institute in Seattle. She obtained her medical degree and Master of Public Health from Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons and School of Public Health. She completed residency training at the Neurological Institute at Columbia Medical Center and a research fellowship in neuropsychiatry and behavioral neurology at Cornell Medical Center. Dr. Isenberg is also board certified in lifestyle medicine and committed to the programmatic development and implementation of care services, which incorporate the latest evidence-based science of dementia prevention, brain health, and women's health. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Isenberg.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Marshall, and thank you to Osher for inviting me to speak to you today about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to speak to you today about brain health, neuroplasticity, and aging, and how to support cognition along the lifespan. I have no disclosures. And the outline for tonight's talk is first, we're going to think about how to define neuroplasticity, to review and outline the latest science-based practices to promote brain health and resiliency along the lifespan or as we age. Also to, and this is really very new, review 14 modifiable risk factors for dementia prevention over the lifespan. So before we begin, I'd like to invite us all to do what I call a 3 centers check. So some of us may have been, eating quickly or driving home in traffic. So let's take a moment and stop what we're doing and take 3 breaths. So inhaling through the nose, an open mouth, soft sigh. And as you're inhaling and exhaling, observe what you're feeling in your body and where your thoughts are and what emotions may be coming up. And as you're doing that, feeling that in the whole body, in the head, and then in the heart. And it's a nice brief check-in with the fullness of the experience as we're going to learn together and share this time. So what is brain health? So brain health is defined as the state of brain functioning across a number of domains, including cognitive, sensory, social, emotional, behavioral, and motor domains that really allow a person to realize their full potential over the life course, and more importantly, irrespective of the presence or absence of a disease, and seen through this interconnected social determinants of health. And it's really critical, and as we'll see, very interconnected with many factors. So we're going to talk about how to thrive across the lifespan, and we're also going to speak about dementia. And I'll take a moment to define what dementia is. Dementia is an umbrella term. It's a very apt metaphor as I'm speaking to you from Seattle. And it's a term for loss of memory or other cognitive abilities, which is severe enough to interfere with one's ability to function independently in the world or to interfere with daily life. And the most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. It's a neurodegenerative dementia, then followed by Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and other forms. And More often than not, as we age, people have a mixed form of dementia with more than one cause contributing to the cognitive challenges that they're experiencing. So I'm going to invite us to move from this idea of, what is dementia to what is eumentia, which is a new approach to dementia prevention, which was pioneered by Vladimir Hachinsky, who really was at the vanguard of dementia prevention and stroke prevention over many decades. And he put forward this concept in this 40th anniversary review in neuroepidemiology in 2020. So, how do we think about factors that can promote health? What are the neuroprotective factors? What are the environmental factors? How do we optimize cognitive, mental, and social functioning? And how do we incorporate this comprehensive, customized, cost-effective, so population-level approach to the prevention of stroke, heart disease, and dementia? And we know that heart health is brain health, so they're really interconnected, as we'll see further in the talk. So here is just a cartoon of a brain with Alzheimer's, and as you see on the left, there's a healthy brain. It's nice and large. And here on the right is a shrunken brain. There's atrophy, there's expansion of the ventricular system, and there's aggregation of these what we call misfolded proteins of amyloid and tau. And the amyloid plaque is extracellular, and the tau neurofibrillary tangle is intracellular in the neuron. And this neuropathological burden is the signature for Alzheimer's disease. There are other factors that contribute as well, but this is really the neuropathological signature of this most common form of dementia, Alzheimer's disease. And dementia is really thought of on a continuum. So some people, may feel that they have some mild cognitive symptoms, mild cognitive impairment that doesn't interfere with their ability to function independently in the world. We would call that mild cognitive impairment. There are different types. There are types which are memory predominant or amnestic, and there are types which involve multiple domains of cognition. We would call that multiple domain. And then over time, there can be progression as the neuropathological burden continues, or neurodegeneration or cerebrovascular disease, to mild dementia, where there's a mild interference with daily activities, to moderate, where there are more prominent neuropsychiatric symptoms or more reliance on others to really help with activities of daily living. And then really in severe dementia, where there's just needing help with virtually all activities. So in California, the longer we live, the single greatest risk factor for dementia is advancing age. And in 2020, there were over 720,000 people living with Alzheimer's disease, and this is projected in 2025 to be, almost 900,000 people, with a 20% increase, and many, many unpaid caregivers, which is challenging for the individual in terms of the care that's required, not being able to work. It's 44 billion in the value of unpaid care. So a significant challenge socially in California. And there are very significant disparities as well, with disproportionate disproportionate risk in people, and actually disproportionate prevalence in Blacks and Hispanic, Latinx Americans. So 2 to 1.5 times more likely than older whites to have Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, respectively. And these communities of color will see the greatest increase in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias over time. We also know that Black caregivers are more likely to provide more than 40 hours of caregiving per week and less likely to have access to respite services. So people who face disproportionate risk also have less access to programs and services. Furthermore, there are significant disparities described. 2 out of 3 Americans who are living with Alzheimer's disease are women, and 2 out of 3 care partners are women as well. So as I said earlier, there is a significant overlap between or shared risk factors for dementia and stroke and heart disease as well. On the bottom of this pyramid, we see very common chronic conditions such as hypertension and diabetes and hyperlipidemia and obesity and smoking. And all of these increase the risk of and susceptibility to cerebrovascular disease, that is to say strokes, and also to dementia. So they contribute to this vascular change and furthermore affect neurodegenerative changes in the brain. And hypertension is really the most significant risk factor. And 1 in 3 of middle-aged adults has a hypertension, and 1 in 2 is predicted by the year 2025. So we know that 6 out of 10 adults in the United States have a single chronic disease, and 4 in 10 adults have 2 or more chronic diseases, which contribute to 4.1 trillion in annual healthcare costs. These are heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease. So let's take another pause, because this data is really quite striking and can be overwhelming. And some of you may be thinking, oh gosh, feeling overwhelmed. Are we having what we call an amygdala hijacking moment, where we're feeling fight, flight, or freeze? Fight, where we're sort of criticizing, are we taking our medications as we should? Have we seen the doctor as frequently as we should, or the care provider? Flight, gosh, I'm going to isolate, I'm not going to interact socially. Or freeze, to kind of ruminate and think about all the things that, in a self-critical way we ought to be doing, but be really frozen in that. So it can be very overwhelming, but let's take a reset. So let's pause. Let's breathe. Sometimes movement can help and then let's reorient, and we're going to shift gears and talk about neuroplasticity. So what we think, do, and pay attention to changes the structure and the function of our brains. And nimble thinking and malleability or adaptability, resilience coping, is something we can learn. So there are different types of brain plasticity, and brain plasticity is really this concept that was discovered in science that conveys the brain's ability to change and adapt. So one type is structural plasticity, which is to say that what we do, where we focus our attention, our energy, these experiences or memories, change the brain's physical structure. And then there is functional neuroplasticity. There's a lot of redundancy in the brain, meaning that different areas can subserve the same function. So brain functions that move from a damaged area, such as in stroke or traumatic brain injury, to the undamaged area. So structural and functional neuroplasticity are 2 types of plasticity, the brain's ability to adapt based on behavior. So this is a study from the Lancet that just came out a couple of months ago, looking at dementia prevention over the lifespan. And 45% of cases of dementia are potentially modifiable across the lifespan, almost half. So starting in early life, low education is a significant increases your risk for dementia, and conversely, lifelong learning and high level of education or high stimulating job and staying engaged in challenging lifelong learning and other activities is really brain health promoting. So lower education is a significant risk factor in early life. In midlife, hearing loss, hyperlipidemia or high LDL cholesterol, untreated depression, traumatic brain injury, physical inactivity, diabetes, smoking, hypertension, obesity, and excessive alcohol. And in late life, social isolation, air pollution, and visual loss. And when we address and mitigate these risks, we could, at the population level, prevent 45% of dementia cases. And this is done by a number of ways, reducing vascular damage. These are sort of the physiological actions, reducing the neuropathology, reducing neuroinflammation or stress, and then building up cognitive reserve. So by addressing cardiometabolic factors such as diabetes and high cholesterol or hypertension or smoking, we would reduce that vascular damage, that cerebrovascular disease or stroke. You can reduce the stroke risk. 9 out of 10 strokes are preventable. If we treat depression, that helps to reduce the dementia pathology and reduce neuroinflammation. So these are sort of mechanisms. And then as we have lifelong learning or this cognitive and social activities, very, very health promoting, it builds this cognitive resilience and brain reserve. And then to address any sensory perceptual processing abnormalities such as hearing loss or visual loss, and to really combat isolation and promote social connection, can really prevent or delay, really improve the quality of life of people living with cognitive challenges or dementia. So this is a really nice acronym for behavioral practices that promote well-being, called REFRESHE-R. And we're going to talk about these, but R for relationships, that social connection, E for exercise or movement as medicine, F for kind of fun, what brings pleasure or uplift, R for relaxation and stress management, E for eating well or food for thought, S for sufficient sleep, H for kind of helping others. We as humans, there is such a thing as selfish altruism. Really helping others really promotes well-being and our own sense of health. Also earth, kind of forest bathing, cultivating that awe in nature. And then reason, what is our sense of purpose and how do we make meaning? So as Dr. Marshall said, I'm boarded in lifestyle medicine, and in lifestyle medicine, we think about these 6 pillars of health that apply to many chronic diseases. And by addressing these 6 pillars, we can improve cognition and combat, promoting brain health across the lifespan. So we're going to talk about each of these in turn. So I'll just go through these briefly, but in terms of food as medicine, there are 3 common diets which are associated with cognitive and stroke protection. And these have been by 30%, and these have been studied most extensively. But we'll talk about how there's a lot of overlap in terms of the ingredients, and effectively they are really whole food plant forward diets and limiting ultra processed foods. But we'll talk more about that. And then in terms of sleep, there's a higher risk if you have less than 6 hours on average or greater than 9 hours. It increases your risk of dementia. Also untreated sleep apnea, or prolonged insomnia, or interrupted sleep like circadian disruption. And then social connections, we know that loneliness, as we talked about, increases the risk for stroke and dementia. Low-level physical activity really is associated with 20% increased risk. If you have moderate or high levels of exercise, you reduce that risk. Stroke reduction compared to inactivity. We know that stress is not something that we can escape. It's something we confront as humans in the world, and the complexity that we navigate and the uncertainty that we navigate. However, the way that we respond to that stress, if we're chronically stressed, that's very pro-inflammatory, and it is associated with a higher risk of hypertension, stroke, cognitive impairment, dementia. And then substance use, we know that middle-aged smoking is associated with a higher risk of cognitive impairment in later life. So thinking about making a lifestyle change, many of us have multiple lifestyle goals, and it's useful and helpful, I think. And if you want to take out a pad and a piece of paper to think about, about that goal, why does that matter to you? So jot it down or visualize it or repeat it in your mind, think about it in your mind's eye. I want to be strong in my body so I can play on the floor with my grandchild. I'm making this up, but something like that, where you really can imagine what is that internal motivation for that lifestyle change that you aspire to incorporate consistently as a practice. And then, why is it important to you? Why are you motivated to do it? And then how confident are you that you're going to make that change? And by going through this exercise regarding a goal, a positive behavior that you want to practice, it really can help with setting you up to be consistent with regard to that behavior. So we're going to talk about these habits or these pillars of health. And as I said, we can't escape stress, but there are ways that we can cope or manage that promote resilience. And one that has been studied most extensively and is under the umbrella of the mind-body practices is meditation. And there are many forms of meditation, but of course, and that's, its own course in and of itself. But in a study completed by Rebecca Wells, looking at people with mild cognitive impairment, those who, in a randomized controlled trial, those who meditated over the course of time had actually less hippocampal atrophy. And what we know about the hippocampus is that this is an area of the brain that is vital for learning and memory. And also we know that this area of the brain has neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. New neurons can grow in this area. And we'll talk more about that in exercise. But so this was in meditation, people had a slowed rate of shrinkage of this area in the brain that is vital for learning and memory. Additionally, in long-term meditators, at age 50, the brains were estimated younger than those of controls by MRI scans. So they changed more slowly over time. This is a huge meta-analysis that was conducted. Here's 26 trials and 18 trials, quite large in the mind-body intervention studies. This number has increased certainly now. But what was also found, and the mindfulness practices that were included were, mindfulness, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, relaxation response, breath regulation. What they found was there was reduced signaling of this inflammatory marker that is associated with stress-related gene expression for inflammation. So there was a reduction in this marker of cellular inflammation with these practices. We also know that we are co-regulating one another all the time. So our emotional state is being read by one another, and we're picking up on people. So there's sort of this back and forth, this resonance, this empathic resonance and cooperation. So we pick up on people's fear or anxiety, and calm is as contagious. And we know that this ratio of positive to negative 5-to-1 can really promote this sort of collective good or collective connection through this interdependence. And I'm not going to talk much about mirror neurons, except to say that that's one of the ways in which we resonate with one another, by feeling and reading one another's expressions through this system and other systems in the brain. So Viktor Frankl, who was a psychologist and who survived horrible times during the Holocaust, wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And of course, as humans, we can't always mindfully choose, because we're going to get flustered and get overwhelmed, and that's human and normal. And yet we can return to this between stimulus and response. There is a space, and in that space lies growth and freedom. Okay, so this was a study looking at almost 2,500 men and women aged 65 and older over time. And what they found was those who incorporated 4 to 5 of these health behaviors, non-smoking, exercising more than 150 minutes of physical activity per week, light to moderate alcohol consumption, high quality, basically whole food, plant forward diet, the MIND diet, which also has fish and chicken, and then lifelong learning or engagement and late life cognitive abilities. If they incorporated 4 to 5 of those factors, there was about a 60% lower risk of Alzheimer's over time. So as you see, if they had 4 to 5 health factors, the proportion of life expectancy with Alzheimer's disease in women and in men was much lower, as I'm showing you here with this arrow that I hope you can see as I'm pointing to it here and here. Okay. It is true, as you can see by these graphs, that women still have a greater, proportion, a risk of Alzheimer's compared to men, but by incorporating these positive health behaviors, they can live longer without Alzheimer's disease. And this was an autopsy study in community dwelling elderly. And it's a fascinating study, because what it found is that these were people who were living independently in the community, and they didn't have Alzheimer's disease. But when they donated their brains demonstrated the neuropathological changes that I showed you in that earlier slide. But they weren't demented. They didn't have dementia. They were living independently. So that's quite something, really sort of showing that our vascular health, our social interactions, these factors that we've been talking about, not smoking, movement as medicine, food for thought, these things really have an impact. This is another autopsy study with almost 600 brains of people. These were quite elderly. Mean age at death was 90 years old. And what they found was that the lifestyle habits were far more linked to the dementia risk than the amyloid plaques or the abnormal blood flow in their brains. And what they found was that the estimate was that just 12% of the cognition-related measurements were affected by amyloid plaques, and were more affected by these 5 lifestyle approaches that we've been talking about. So habit number 2 is what I call food for thought. And as I said, the MIND diet has been studied most extensively. And this diet encourages the consumption of a variety of plant-based foods, including vegetables, especially leafy greens, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and legumes. These foods are filled with phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fibers, all brain health foods. And we know that adherence to this MIND diet reduces the risk of Alzheimer's disease, and in those who have cognitive issues, slows cognitive decline. Furthermore, it reduced the risk of mild cognitive impairment or progression from mild cognitive impairment to Alzheimer's disease, and reduced the all-cause mortality in people living with Alzheimer's disease. Furthermore, berries, all colored berries, we want to think colors of the rainbow, but berries are really rich in flavonoids, antioxidants, which are associated with improved cognitive function. And then whole grains like oats and brown rice and whole wheat bread are also an important part, or, farro or other grains that are brown rice are terrific for fiber and other essential nutrients. Furthermore, healthy fats such as olive oil and nuts are encouraged. And these fats provide essential nutrients that may also reduce the risk of cognitive impairment. So this is a handout that you will receive, or that's available to you now, kind of breaking down the MIND diet plan. And in addition to adding in these berries and nuts and colors of the rainbow, vegetables and fruits, and whole grains, and your seafood, your marine-based omega-3s, you want to limit things like red meat, especially processed red meat, which can increase cancer risk and also neuroinflammation. You want to limit pastries and sweets, limit fried and fast foods or ultra-processed foods, and also full-fat cheese. These are just different sort of food guides that I pulled. This is from Canada. I love the way they kind of divide this plate. So half of the plate of your healthy plate, as you see, is filled with delicious, nutritious, colorful, vibrant fruits and vegetables. And then you have whole grains and your protein. Here's from the Harvard School of Public Health, another plate, which has stay active as well. And let's not forget about the deliciousness of flavor. If it's not yummy, we're not going to eat it. So what does that taste like in your family, in your culture, in your location? What does that taste like? What does that look like? So keep thinking about, how does it look? How does it taste? What's the flavor? And this was a study actually designed to look at the benefits of cocoa supplementation. But what they found in these people who were either receiving cocoa or a multivitamin for the elderly, that people who took the multivitamin for the elderly had better cognitive outcomes. So if you can't get your full nutrition from whole foods, this study may suggest that a Centrum Silver or another multivitamin could be beneficial. Okay, so as I said, what was studied most extensively for brain health has been the MIND diet, which is a combination of the DASH or the hypertension diet and also the Mediterranean diet. But there are many diets that have a similar type of pyramid in terms of really focusing on healthy fruits and vegetables, socialization and movement, and then limiting ultra-processed food. So this is a great example through old ways of different heritage diets that have similar benefits and quite a lot of overlap, as you see here. And we know that this is kind of taking a life course model for health. We want to incorporate these healthy and nourishing foods. The benefit is greatest the earlier we start. So in young adults, you can add up to about 13 years. At 60, maybe 8 years, and at 80, still 3.5 years. And the largest gains are seen from adding those legumes, those whole grains and nuts, and then limiting red and processed meat. And then thinking about how could we really do this in a realistic way, let's think about what are our preferences and what are we willing to try? How can we add in healthier foods? And talking about that with the grocery shopper, sometimes referring to a dietitian or nutritionist is useful and helpful. We have virtual shared medical appointments where we focus on food for thought and really not thinking about going from 0 to 100, but kind of considering those incremental changes. Some people are really, they're sandwiched between taking care of their kids and their aging parents. So prepackaged healthy meals might be a great option. Sometimes, again, thinking about why it matters to you, really connecting the personal and the planetary health and sustainability can motivate you further. And then, thinking about variety. Variety is the spice of life. So what are some different textures or spices? Plate to we eat with our eyes and our nose and our mouths. And then, enjoying sitting at the table and socializing. We enjoy a meal so much more when we're sharing that. These are some great links, the old ways I spoke about, and the Gaples Institute is fantastic information about the connection between personal and planetary health and sustainability. So this is our food for thought. We have a pop-up teaching kitchen where we went to the Memory Hub, as it's called, and made this delicious food that we then shared. Okay, the next habit is movement as medicine, and your brain really does love. We've evolved to move. And when we exercise, so many things happen. So many things happen. So we release a lot of neurochemicals, endorphins that can help us to feel less pain or feel kind of this energy or really feeling good, serotonin that can improve our mood. We release these hormones like brain-derived neurotrophic factor that travel in through the bloodstream up to the brain that stimulate that neurogenesis or growth of new neurons in the area, as I said, the hippocampus, that's important for learning and memory. It also promotes angiogenesis or growth of blood vessels, and synaptogenesis or growth of synapses and connections in brain systems. So really, it's just so the brain does love movement. And this is just kind of another cartoon about the benefit of exercise. And I know you had a really wonderful first talk by Dr. Natalie Marshall about all the benefits of exercise. So I'll just point towards this briefly, but exerkines are these biochemicals that are stimulated with exercise that play these key roles in multiple organ systems, neurological, cardiovascular, immune, and metabolic systems to promote health span, longevity, and resilience. So you release these exerkines, including irisin from the muscle that travel in the bloodstream and that promote health in multiple organ systems and reduce dementia risk by targeting these cardiometabolic diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on. We also know that exercise is associated with prolonged survival in people who are living with Alzheimer's disease. So physical fitness was associated with slower rates of decline, so more preserved gray matter volumes in those who were both cognitively normal seniors and those with early Alzheimer's disease. And in a population-based study of almost 400 participants, when incident AD cases who were physically inactive were compared to those who were active, in other words, where people developed Alzheimer's disease, those who were more physically active lived longer and had better preserved cognitive function. So there's, over 90 meta-analyses have come out in the last 5 years looking at movement and exercise and its benefit. And we know there's multiple mechanisms of action It's beneficial in multiple ways. It's beneficial for cognition and really specifically in terms of what we call processing speed and executive function. There's more benefit in these domains compared to memory. It also, we know that physical frailty is associated with cognitive frailty. And the opposite is true. If we can stay physically strong and preserve our balance, it promotes our cognitive health as well. So there's this bi-directional relationship between the body health, fitness and frailty, and brain health, fitness and frailty. We also, of course, sleep better, and with more restful sleep, we clear out these misfolded proteins that through the lymphatic system and can help us to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease as well. So, and when you look at these meta-analyses, the greatest evidence is in primary dementia prevention. However, there is evidence in mild cognitive impairment and in dementia, and there's greatest benefit in group setting compared to individual, but this has been seen in a number of settings at the gym, home-based exercises, whatever is available. And I love how Dr. Marshall talked about the exercise snack, so there's always time to get up and maybe walk for 5 minutes or do a squat or raise your arms or do a gentle balance on one leg while you're brushing your teeth, so get a move. What's recommended is at least 150 minutes of moderate aerobic physical activity per week. So that is, 30 minutes, 5 days a week, or you can have an instant recess where you do 10 minutes, 3 times a week. 3 times a day. It doesn't really matter. You can do, 10 minutes, 3 times a day as an instant recess. You can go take a 30-minute walk. You can do all of it in a day, but ideally you're doing it at least 5 days a week because consistency and is matters. And we don't want to sit for too long because we think of being sedentary is not health promoting either. So 150 minutes of moderate aerobic physical activity or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity per week. And vigorous is measured by an inability to really sing or talk during that type of activity. So you're breathless enough that you can't really hold forth or sing easily. We also recommend strength and resistance training 2 times per week, best combined with aerobic activity. And then, balance training and stretching. So balance training 3 times a week, Tai Chi, yoga, heel to toe walks, Qigong, dancing. So those are the recommendations. And then you're familiar with exercise snacks. So those can be sort of brief moments of strength training or aerobic exercise throughout the day, like wall push-ups or chair squats or a brisk walk. And it can really motivate you. It builds confidence. You just did it. You feel good. And maybe you want to do it again in an hour or 2 hours. And you can get energy and improved focus. So if you're sitting at your computer and you're noticing that it's really, really, really hard to focus, sometimes the best thing to do is actually turn away from the computer and take a brisk walk. And that can kind of elevate your mood, improve your focus, and then we can call this a victorious cycle. Okay, I spoke about frailty and dementia risk. So really that overall physical health promotes brain health along the lifespan. It's as important at 80 as it was at 18 or 8 to remain as physically active as you can in your body, given your health challenges. So habit 4, socialization. We know that increased social interaction has been shown to be of benefit, minimize loneliness and isolation, reduce stress, even reduce vascular factors that contribute to cognitive decline. Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, wrote Together, the Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. And there's so many ways in which isolation has a detrimental effect on a number of health outcomes. And we just know that people, as we get older, can feel more lonely and more isolated. This can be impacted by life circumstances, retirement, bereavement, poverty, living alone, and so forth. So we really want to find ways to promote social connection and to combat that isolation that everyone felt so deeply during the pandemic as well. And then another way to kind of promote connection is to think about what really matters to you. Coming back to that, what's going to motivate you, what matters to you. So what's your map? What's your mission? What's a goal that you feel really strongly about? What's an aspiration, a desire, or longing? And then what's a purpose? Why are you wanting to do this? And sometimes when you have that, it can actually really promote that social connection, because maybe it's around climate and then you're volunteering, or maybe it's around, any number of factors, or your spiritual practices. So really kind of digging deep and looking internally can also paradoxically promote social connection and interconnection. All right, habit 5, sleep. So as I mentioned earlier, we know that sleep deprivation increases the buildup of these plaques and tangles, all of this neurodegenerative change in the brain, and restorative sleep allows our brains to clear those toxins and waste that can really interfere with neuronal function. Sleep furthermore helps us to consolidate memories, and in people who are affected by dementia, lack of sleep can cause agitation, even delirium, and increased fall risk. So restful sleep across the lifespan is key. We furthermore know that our sleep cycle changes as we age, and we get less of the deep sleep, more awakenings throughout the cycle of sleep, and more fragmented REM sleep. So there's a decrease in total time, a decrease in sleep efficiency, and as I said, the decrease in slow, deep wave and REM sleep as we age. So we may need to take naps. We may need to go to bed earlier. There's a number of sleep disorders that I'll touch upon briefly, such as obstructive sleep apnea. And these are just some of the signs and symptoms. If your partner's loud, snoring loudly, or has a lot of daytime somnolence, if they're choking or gasping, or if you have a witnessed pause, they may have sleep apnea, and untreated sleep apnea can increase stroke risk and also risk of dementia. So if this happens, I recommend that you speak to your health provider. Restless leg syndrome is this urge to move your legs that can get worse at night. Sometimes stretching before bed, taking that walk, can be helpful. Sometimes magnesium can be helpful. And then REM behavioral sleep disorder is when you act out your dreams. Actually, when we have REM sleep, our bodies are quiet and not moving typically, but in REM behavioral sleep disorder, we act out our dreams. And this can, in some cases, is associated with neurodegenerative diseases such as Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's. And then insomnia, very, very, very common. And there's really great evidence-based approaches to combat insomnia. And as you see, its common prevalence is about 50% in older adults. And there's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is the first line treatment. And there's a really fantastic app through the VA that's a CBTI app that you can download to your phone. And then we talked about the importance, the cognitive reserve that you want to continue to protect, the cognitive resilience that you want to promote through lifelong learning. So lifelong learning, these challenges have to be fun and interesting. So I'll go through this a little bit. And then this is a meta-analysis of cognitive stimulation and how it was helpful in a number of cases for people. And then how do we implement this through, it should be something that's interesting, not too frustrating. About an hour a day is recommended. And this is from the American Heart Association, Life's Essential 8, kind of reviewing these pillars that we talked about. And then this is our brain prescription, brain health prescription, kind of reviewing everything that we've talked about. And in addition, looking at your medicines that you're taking and thinking about how to de-prescribe, anticholinergic or sedating medications. We don't want to be taking those Tylenol PM medications. The PM medications with Benadryl can harm your cognition and thinking. Thinking about contributing conditions, our exercise prescription that we talked about, how to promote stress resilience. This is what we've been speaking of tonight. And then our shared medical appointments that we offer, and some food for thought cook-alongs. And thank you very much.
The first question, Nancy, is can you please comment on inherited risk?
Yes. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. In the vast majority of late onset dementia, advanced age is the single greatest risk factor. There are some forms of early onset dementias, Alzheimer's disease, being the most common, where there are, certain genes that have been identified, presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and amyloid precursor protein. And these genes have Mendelian inheritance. They're autosomal dominantly transmitted. So if you have a first-degree relative who has an early onset form of Alzheimer's disease, typically before the age of 65 or even before the age of 60, then that may be an instance where they might have genetic testing, or you would speak to a genetic counselor. There are other types of early onset dementias, such as frontotemporal dementias, that also have genes associated with them, and that occurs in a third to a half of cases of frontotemporal lobar degeneration or frontotemporal dementias. But as I said, the vast majority of the late onset are sporadic, meaning they don't have an associated familial risk. Now, so that's a quick answer. I have to just add one thing, which is that we used to talk about ApoE as a susceptibility risk. However, there was a recent paper looking at people who had 2 copies of the apolipoprotein E4 allele. So all of us are born with 2 copies of apolipoprotein E, either 2, 3, or 4. And the thinking is evolving regarding people who are homozygote, meaning having 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene. So I hope this is a very complicated topic, but most people, the majority of people, if they don't have a first-degree relative with an early onset form, it's not likely to be genetic.
And, there's another question that says, what's the role of family history and genetics in the risk of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia? One thing I wanted to maybe have you comment on with that question, which was similar to the first question, is how lifestyle can impact that. Even if you have a bad copy of the gene, how can your lifestyle maybe impact you not developing Alzheimer's disease?
Yes, and I thank you so much, Dr. Marshall. And that is also really, really of critical importance. So what Dr. Marshall is pointing towards is that there have been studies looking at people who even have genes for these dementias, and we know that in people who have these genes, if they incorporate these health promoting lifestyle behaviors that we've been talking about, which is to say exercise and diet and limiting harmful substances like alcohol and cigarettes and marijuana, and other harmful substances, and cultivating that positive outlook and stress resilience, their brains actually look healthier over time, so they don't change as quickly, and their cognitive functioning is also better later in as they're followed over time. So where they might, because they have the gene, ultimately develop the disease, they will live longer, healthier if they incorporate consistently these lifestyle behaviors that we've been talking about. And I'll just add one more thing, which I think is really critical in all of this, which is that we aren't, in most cases, we are not our genes and we aren't our parents. In most cases, we aren't our genes and we're not our parents. And furthermore, and this is work of Becca Levy, and this is very important work. I went quickly through it in the presentation because we were at time, but she looked at 4,000 people over 4 years. And those people who had positive associations regarding aging had lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. And furthermore, this was true for people who had a copy of the ApoE4 gene, which, as I said, is a susceptibility risk. It's modifiable, but it's a susceptibility risk for Alzheimer's disease. So not only is it the lifestyles that we incorporate day to day, but that umbrella of our kind of mindset, and how does that mindset influence our health and well-being as we age is really critical as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing that you're talking about, because you were talking about the mirror neurons and how calmness can be infectious as well as anxiety can be infectious, how your cells really listen to your thoughts. I mean, I've heard people say that, but that mindset can be related to whether genes get turned on or off that could cause disease or not. Do you have any more to say about those mirror neurons and our interdependence? Is there something more that you would say about that?
I love how you connect that to like our cellular expression. I mean, I think we're such social animals, and we're swimming in this social milieu. And I think that it's really a call for policy that promotes social emotional learning, and policy that promotes understanding of differential, like different types of levels of functioning that we can have, cultivate compassion and connection across the lifespan. Because if we're in toxic environments, as it were, cruel, othering environments, it's really toxic to our, not only our nervous system, but to our physiology.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So we have a sleep question. It says, if we should avoid PM medications like Tylenol PM or so on, what healthy sleep aids do you recommend, if any?
Let me take a moment to just emphasize the evidence about why it's important to avoid the PMs. So there have been large population studies looking at dementia risk, and what was found was that people who used Benadryl consistently for sleep had a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's. This is also true for people who use Ambien or other Zolpidem or other Z medications that are prescription sleep aids. So that's why I recommend, as a cognitive health doctor, that people avoid or limit Benadryl for sleep. In terms of things that can be helpful, I mean, the valerian teas or the nighty-night teas or other like steeped infusions can be really helpful. And then just like sleep hygiene. So your room should be cool and dark and quiet. And just sort of the sleep hygiene tips. You want to not be on social media. You want to not have your your phone or your TV with a violent program as you're going to sleep. I love a sort of a sleep ritual, which can involve gentle stretches. It might involve an Epsom soap bath, whatever going to kind of get you into the groove of restorative sleep. Magnesium, some people love to rub magnesium cream on their soles of their feet. Everybody's different, and it's probably not going to be one thing, but kind of just getting to know what is it that's going to ease you into that restful state. Another thing is that if you're in bed and you're ruminating, your mind is going a mile an hour and you're lying there, you don't want to continue to lie in bed. And I am not a sleep specialist. I'm a cognitive neurologist and neuropsychiatrist, and I work very closely with our colleagues in sleep. And, but what you want to do is get up and do something that's kind of boring, so maybe listen to something that's like music or that's soothing, or maybe listen on your to one of those sleep stories, or do a body scan. Body scans can be very helpful for mid-cycle awakening, like a yoga nidra practice, to kind of drop into the body, move as best one can. Those are, do you want to add anything? I'm curious. Is there something else that you like?
Well, one thing that I get asked a lot as an oncologist is CBD okay to use for sleep, or THC? What would you say as a neurologist? Like, does that interfere with sleep, or is that okay to help people sleep?
Yeah, I mean, I think again that it's not a one size fits all. And so I want to have humility that there's a subjective experience that people have. However, sometimes anxiety can be intensified with THC, maybe less so with CBD. I don't usually recommend it because it can also affect memory and thinking. Some people can get a little more, as I say, anxious or suspicious. So, but on the other hand, you may have experiences in your own trials where it's been helpful to you. So I try to, I don't say categorically no, but it's not my go-to.
So there's a question that's about, there's two questions about, actually there were three questions about food. One is, I'm going to say all three of them and you can kind of address all three of them. So
Okay.
Non-organic food, like non-organic produce, how important is it to have non-organic food? I mean, to have organic food. And specifically, this person is saying they know about the Dirty Dozen, but then sometimes it's too expensive.
Right.
I mean, as an oncologist, I would say eating produce, even if it's not organic, is way better than eating processed food, super ultra processed food. Even an apple that's not organic can still be much more healthy than eating Doritos. So that's what I would say about it from like a cancer perspective, but I don't know if you have another thought of it. The other thing that they want to know is about meat substitutes. Are those really considered like an ultra processed food? And even smoked salmon, is that considered an ultra processed food? Those are the three food questions that we have.
Yeah, I will answer those as best I can. So I absolutely agree with you that a whole food that's conventional is much better than like the juice or something that's ultra, or Doritos, so having an apple, even if it's not organic, is better. If you can't, I think trying as best you can with the Dirty Dozen to limit those if they're not organic, and then maybe getting as local as you can. So if you know that there's a place where maybe it's conventional, it's not organic, but it's pretty local, which in California, where there's, I mean, really wonderful produce, is better. The other thing that I'll say is that frozen foods are affordable, and the nutrients are preserved in the frozen foods. So frozen peas, frozen corn, and are typically more affordable. So cooking with frozen vegetables that are flash frozen when they're picked can also be really nutritious. And then, of course, you get the fiber in the whole food too, so you get the whole package. So that's another
Right.
thought. But yeah, there's a lot of science around the detrimental effects of ultra processed foods promoting inflammation, neuroinflammation as well.
And the other thing about like the meat substitutes is that they have a pretty big environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can still use a lot of resources like water and electricity. And so the ultra processed, meats, even though they're like vegan, like they're
Mm-hmm.
vegan
Mm-hmm.
meat,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily better. And it's
Right.
controversial whether those are really considered like an ultra processed food.
Yes. I mean, to your point, I think that if you can get your protein with legumes, lentils, beans and soups, edamame, soy products, there's so many other ways to get healthy proteins. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's, wanting to make a little change, I mean, it depends on what your goal is. If it's around personal health and maybe addressing, cholesterol or the salts in your blood pressure, and you might try that may be kind of a little entryway into, trying that burger that's a bean burger, a veg burger, or a, impossible burger might get you into, okay, now I would love to try this, stir fry with tofu.
Right. It might help someone bridge the gap.
Yeah.
Um, with stress as a risk factor for brain diseases, is trauma an even stronger risk factor for dementia? And if one's risk factors are very strong, are the lifestyle factors able to affect neuroplasticity and dementia prevention as well?
So chronic stress is not something that is good for the brain, and in particular can really harm these vital structures for learning and memory of the hippocampus and limbic structures in the entorhinal cortex and so forth. However, I'm not aware of a study that has, I mean, Alyssa Epple has done incredible work on stress resilience at UCSF and has demonstrated that people who incorporate different practices, whether mindfulness, movement, and other practices, really do promote health, feel better, have less depression. And caregivers had better outcomes as well, people caring for kids with autism or people with dementia. So I don't know that we can, certainly, again, looking at like policy to improve health across the life course, I think is really important. And, adverse events and trauma, we can heal from, absolutely. And we want to think about systemic ways to also minimize that as well.
So there's a question about the mechanisms that are underlying brain promoting effects of positive social connection. Is it
Mm-hmm.
because it's stress reduction, or is it something even more than that?
I think of it as it's how we talked about neuroplasticity and we defined what neuroplasticity was. And when we are feeling good and feeling connected, we can pay attention, and where neurons that fire together wire together, and where our energy goes, our attention flows. So there's all these ways that if we're kind of feeling good and connected, we can learn better, and so then we have changes in the brain as a result. So we know, for example, that if we are learning in a social milieu, the plasticity in the brain is enhanced. I think it has to do with kind of that, it just feels it's salient, it's interesting, and it's pleasurable. It's positive. It feels good.
Yeah, it does feel good. So there's a question about, do you feel psilocybin could be a tool to repair the brain?
There's so much really, state-of-the-art research about psilocybin, and other approaches. I don't think we're there in terms of cognitive health, but for, depression and PTSD, there's really exciting emerging science.
So if someone's living near freeways or more polluted areas, can they still benefit from getting aerobic exercise outdoors, but still be at risk for dementia? Maybe commenting about the role of pollution and
Yeah,
how strong is that evidence, and how much do we
yeah,
need to be worried? Us,
right.
we that live in cities.
Right. We that live in cities do need to be concerned about the particulate matter and the pollution for sure. That's very real. And as we saw on that, 14 modifiable risk factors, it's a significant factor. So I would say that if there are days, especially if you're close to fires, like wildfires, if there's a bad fire day and you have your index, that purple index of like what the air quality is, if the air quality is bad, you want to exercise inside. So that's like using your best kind of practical approach, being really just practical. And that might be your stationary recumbent bike. It could be having a stretching day on the floor. It might be turning on a YouTube video or using your web-based strength training app. It could be a lot of different things indoors. But if the index is bad outside, if there's a lot of particulate matter with the fires, with the wildfires in California, I would not risk it. I would not recommend risking it. And they've done studies with firefighters, and we just really need to be careful and limit that exposure. I wouldn't even wear a mask. I would just not risk it. Do it inside, stay inside on those
So
days.
there's a question now about traumatic brain injuries and then challenges with that. And then is there anything in particular that's encouraging or helpful for a patient that's had a traumatic brain injury as far as decreasing risk of Alzheimer's?
Yes.
Or dementia?
Right. And so there's been a lot of research looking at things like chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Those are people like our football players or boxers who have significant and repeated head injuries that change the, proteins and promote neurodegeneration in the brain, change inflammation and promote neurodegeneration in the brain. Most people who have a mild traumatic brain injury, so just a mild concussion, most people have had a concussion in their lives, one or two. Most people heal from those. And there are and the brain, we talked about the different types of plasticity. There's the functional and the structural. So there's this redundancy. So if a part of the brain is affected, other parts often, especially the younger we are when we have the injury, can take over that function or form a new system to do that task. So we want to, on the other hand, be really, smart about it. So we want to wear, bike in a bike lane, or wear your helmet, or minimize the contact sport. Or if you did have a concussion, don't go right back onto the field. And there's been a lot of policy around safety in kids who are playing different sports, thankfully. And if you had, most people that I speak to in the office have had a minor head injury. There's also really great approaches like cognitive rehabilitation and brain injury support networks that can be really helpful as well. And I would say that cognitive resilience and reserve and physical resilience and reserve are the things that you want to promote and focus on. And of course, limiting, subsequent brain injury.
So there's two questions about chemotherapy and brain fog.
Mhm.
So the first is any thoughts on how to help with chemo brain fog during treatment and
Mhm.
helping to heal the brain after chemo? And then there's another question about, does having chemotherapy diminish neuroplasticity over time? And I can just comment about, like, as an oncologist, about chemo brain or chemo fog. What we think causes chemo brain or chemo fog is inflammation from the treatments we give for cancer, which can be chemo, radiation, surgery. It can be immune therapy or like antibody therapies that we give. And this is inflammation that can be measured in the blood for 6 to 12 months after the very final treatment. So it can last a really long time. But it does get better because that inflammation does go down
Mhm.
after, 6 to 12 months. Exercise has been shown to help with brain fog, and getting adequate sleep has been shown to help. But I think it's also related to what your baseline cognitive reserve was. So if you have
Mhm.
a large cognitive reserve, you might not notice as much. If your cognitive
Mhm.
reserve was less, you might notice it more than somebody who has the very same level of inflammation.
Mhm.
So from an oncology standpoint, that's how we think about it. But from a neurology standpoint, how would you address that? And are there any treatments for it that you know of?
So I see lots of people with, oh, sorry, with chemo brain, and I agree with you that exercise and sleep and these other pillars of brain health that we've been speaking about are critical. I will mention too that some people who have had radiation can have delayed radiation, leukoencephalopathy, or other challenges as well that can be later. But in addition to those pillars of lifestyle medicine that we incorporate, uh, I sometimes use nootropic medications, such as memantine, for example, which is an NMDA antagonist that helps to prevent excitotoxic damage to the brain. I sometimes also use a psychostimulant or a dopamine medication to kind of focus attention and concentration. Cognitive rehabilitation with my colleagues in neuropsychology is something that we use as well. And then I think, these support networks, survivorship networks, or in virtual shared medical appointments where there's that peer-to-peer support to really be consistent with implementing the positive health behaviors over time is so key. So you feel like you're not as alone in the experience, and that you feel that support and accountability. And I just will say one more thing. This is really, this is important for people who are experiencing chemo brain. It's also, we have a program for women who are experiencing brain fog in midlife, in the menopause, perimenopause, menopause transition, because there are many changes in that period of accelerated aging that can affect cognition among many other systems. And we have a shared medical appointment to target brain health in that period as well, which until very recently, had not been, I would say, recognized in as much as a problem, as a challenge, even though half of the population of the world experience it, they live through it,
Yeah.
frankly.
Um, is there any evidence that these brain health recommendations that you're talking about for cognition and dementia prevention can help with mental illness?
Yes. So this is kind of I think the beauty in a way, and elegance of these approaches. And this is what Osher, I think, speaks to, is this holistic approach to well-being, broadly speaking. So we know that in schizophrenia, for example, exercise is important, social connection is important, nutrition is important. We know in depression it's important. I mean, and I'm not saying it's in without other approaches like medication and behavioral health and, you know, other approaches, maybe they're other, you know, TMS or other approaches, but these holistic approaches improve health, broadly speaking. They improve metabolic health, they improve cognitive and mental health, they reduce inflammation in the body and the brain. They target, as you've pointed out, you know, as an oncologist, they have a huge impact on cancer, you know, risk, and also risk of metastasis, in particular for exercise. So I think that these pillars of health and well-being that we've been talking about tonight, and that Dr. Marshall has spoken about, and I'm sure are spoken about in the other Osher Wise talks, you know, really promote, broadly speaking, well-being across the health span.
So I think you may have already answered this, but there's another question. It says, what are the risks of emotional trauma on the risk of Alzheimer's disease? Is there a direct correlation? Like emotional trauma, I would say, you know, like people that have emotional trauma have a high stress response usually. So how would that affect their risk of getting Alzheimer's disease?
Well, you know, Bruce McEwen at the Rockefeller University many decades now ago looked at people with emotional trauma or stress, post-traumatic stress, chronic depression, and demonstrated that they had changes in areas of the brain that are susceptible to the early changes of Alzheimer's disease, namely in the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. So severe, you know, or repeated emotional trauma contributing to post-traumatic stress or chronic depression, refractory depression, can cause structural changes in the brain, and also changes in, you know, neurotransmitters in the brain. And it's also true that those areas which are susceptible to those changes are the areas that are responsive to the approaches that we've been speaking about. And what have been studied most extensively is, you know, the aerobic exercise and social connection, I would say. But so there's susceptibility to these structures in the brain that are affected early in the neuropathogenesis, you know, of Alzheimer's disease. And these same areas can respond through these mechanisms that we've been talking about, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, and exercise, and other mechanisms, reduced neuroinflammation, improved vascular tone, a number of myriad other ways, you know, autophagy and other ways that these areas can have neuroprotection and promote resilience. So with caution, you know, I'm hopeful. Of course, we don't have that crystal ball, and we can't say in each instance because it's customized, and it's, you know, there's such a complexity to each individual, and yet these approaches can be beneficial in many instances.
There's another question that says, what resources do you recommend to identify support and socialization groups for people who tend to be isolated? I think that's a really hard one because a lot of people are isolated and they don't know how to connect with people. There's not a easy way for them to connect. Is there anything that you know of, resources for that?
You know, I wish we did more I wish we did more here in America around that. I know in the UK they have these like social ambassadors in communities, and they have these gathering places, and I think that it can be really hard. And so sometimes if there's something that you enjoy, like a hobby, like you like birding or you like reading, you know, you might join a book group or a birding group or a cooking group, sort of thinking about something that, or even, virtual meetups can be really helpful for people who may have, who may be really introverted or may have a lot of social anxiety. And studies have shown that those types of connections can also be, although different, can promote a sense of connection. So I guess really thinking creatively about the different ways that people can connect through what they find meaningful or interesting, salient, what draws their attention. Some people
Right.
like to work out with people. Some people like to read quietly with one another, you know.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hiking groups that you can join or walking groups. That's great because you're socializing, but you're also exercising. So it's like doing two things at once that could be really good for everyone.
Mhm.
So our time is up, and thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you so much for your incredible talk and all of your thoughtful answers to these very important questions. Thank you for spending this portion of your night with us, and good night.